this leads to one of the things that happened a decade back, which I'm sure you've answered multiple times, which was the Radia papers.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a very weird thing. I honestly never understood, even when it happened, about like journalists talk to political insiders all the time. I still don't understand what is the like the
But
two things.
actually, since you're
Yeah,
talking about it,
yeah,
just look at it in perspective.
yeah.
This lady was the PR for the Tatas and various other things. So by definition, and later for the Ambanis, for Mukesh Ambani. So by definition, she was talking to journalists all the time.
Right.
Her phone was tapped by the income tax authorities on the basis of an anonymous letter which said, she's made money very quickly. And that apparently was enough to lead to taps on her phones. I mean, first of all, in terms of human rights and freedoms, that's an interesting question. Then people's phones are tapped all the time. Of the 10,000 conversations they had on file, something like 80 conversations were leaked. Not only were they leaked, whoever leaked them may have thoughtful enough to make transcripts of all of them, to put them in folders, a device like a file, audio file, with the conversations and the transcripts was then hand put in a brown paper envelope and sent to every newspaper virtually in Delhi. So obviously, somebody from the government had sold those tapes to somebody. That somebody presumably was rich enough to want to sabotage the Tatas or whoever, and had been able to transcribe them. Also cherry-picked out of thousands of conversations, just 1 or 2% of those conversations to leak. They picked conversations which they thought would cause the most impact. They were given to Indian newspapers, none of which bothered to even contact the people named on the tapes, or even to have the tapes tested. After this appeared, I took the tapes that involved me, and I had them tested in Washington and in London by guys who did audio testing for the FBI and for Scotland Yard. All of them said the tapes had been tampered with. I gave the reports to Outlook, which had carried the original tape, and Outlook ran the tape report saying that the tapes were faked, but would not apologize for carrying them. So I sued them. You know what it's like to sue anybody in India. It took 3 years, 4 years, at the end of which they withdrew the allegations. They said they regretted carrying them. But how many people follow this through? No? How many people bother to say, why was this taping done? Why were these tapes manufactured? Why was all this money spent on sending them to people? Who tampered with them? Who manipulated them? And why would a journalist just carry something which is clearly part of a corporate war without any kind of verification? I mean, there were very serious questions about A, the way in which our phones are tapped, B, the way in which officers sell these tapes, and C, the way in which we verify stories. What journalists said to her, etc., was ultimately the least of it, because most of that came from tapes that had been tampered with or manipulated. Most people just forgot. They said they'll forget about it. Only I was bloody-minded enough to get them tested, to go to court, to fight in the High Court, etc., and to get them to apologize. But most people just drop it because that's the Indian way. You just let things happen.
So 3 years is what it took.
Yeah, probably more actually. Because what happened was we filed a case after about a year when it was clear that Outlook was happy to carry things saying the tapes were fake, but was not going to withdraw the allegations. Then it went to a sessions court. Then the sessions court didn't want to hear the case. The very nice lady judge said, "Oh, there are too many high-profile people here." So it was then kicked up to the High Court. It took time to come in the High Court. Then, fortunately, we got a very good judge in the High Court who sent it back to a lower court and said, "I want a verdict in a year." We had a very efficient judge. I don't think they had any defense at all, and ultimately their case collapsed.
So, but I mean, again, I know that it's obviously very dicey territory. I have a two-part question about this. One is that you said that it was somebody who did it. Obviously, there's no way to say the name. So let's actually ignore that question. The second question is, uh, I, I'm I didn't follow the story entirely, like clearly. So maybe I'm completely off with this. But journalists talking to whatever political quote unquote insiders, isn't that a normal thing, or was that the assumption was that the allegation was that they said that journalists were influencing the cabinet, the
No,
formation of the cabinet.
no. The conversations happened after the election, after the second election, the UPA won.
Yeah.
Meera Radia was very close to the DMK, particularly to a lady called Kanimori,
Right.
and wanted to know who would be in the cabinet. So she called up many journalists to ask for information on who would be in it. And journalists, of course, also doing stories, asked her, "What does the DMK say? Tell us," etc., etc. So there were these conversations because some of them were about cabinet formation. This was twisted to say that journalists were trying to arrange cabinet births. That was the allegation, which in my case at least Outlook withdrew and apologized for.
But what about the rest? The rest of the journalists didn't follow through with it, or it's just like,
You see, we don't know what the rest of the journalists did because she spoke to God knows. When the CBI got hold of the case, it interrogated some journalists. They found no criminality. But intriguingly, the journalists it interrogated were not the ones whose tapes had been published. So clearly, there were more people there. And I don't know what criminality they were investigating. Of course, ultimately, everybody was cleared. But she was very well connected. She knew everybody. I mean, if you are the one who was a gatekeeper for, say, Ratan Tata. I did an interview with Ratan Tata many, many years ago. She was the one who fixed it. She had PR for all the Tata companies. Obviously, you're going to deal with journalists. And even a concern about who was going to be the telecom minister was reflected in the Tata's interests.
okay. Maybe anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to like on this topic a very small doubt about
Yeah,
the concept of lobbying. Okay, so in the US and all, lobbying is a very structured.
yeah,
How do I put it? It's an occupation. There are professional lobbyists. There are people whose job is to lobby for a particular candidate to become a governor or a senator, etc., etc., etc. But in India, lobbying is still an informal thing and sort of like looked down upon, like something
yeah.
shady. Do you think like there should be a more formalization of lobbying in the country, or you don't see uh, that being a possibility here?
No, I think it should be formalized. I think there should be laws. There
Yeah,
should be, like there are in the US, very strict guidelines. There should also be,
yeah,
like, we have a rule that defense agents are not allowed. The fact is, anybody who sells arms uses an agent. So these people lie, they take their money abroad. So the more things you formalize, the more things you bring within the system, the more check you have about it, the more transparency, and the more control over the black money. In the case of defense agents, the money is paid in Swiss francs. Why shouldn't it be paid here? Let them pay
yeah.
tax on it. It's a legitimate activity. It happens all over the world.
Mm.
Yeah, even I was very the reason for the story never, because I think by that time I'd watched enough American TV shows to realize that lobbying is a thing. So
Yeah.
I never understood why this is a conspiracy. Like, and
Yeah.
another thing which is a controversial opinion to have is about the Cobra Post sting operation, for example.
Yeah.
Like, as explosive as it was, I was like, is any of this surprising? Like, it just like, I mean, I know that it happens, and I think everybody in the whatever. But yeah, with this specific thing, I didn't understand why the lobbying was considered such a big this thing, big deal.